Hello, and welcome to our weekly dialogue with Helga Zepp-LaRouche. She is the founder and chairwoman of the Schiller Institute. Today is May 14th, 2025. I'm Harley Schlanger, and I'll be your host. You can send your questions and comments to Helga at questions@schillerinstitute.org or post them on the chat page. Helga, we're in the midst of a series of very high-profile diplomatic initiatives with President Trump in Southwest Asia, a meeting between representatives of Ukraine and Russia scheduled for tomorrow in Istanbul, ongoing deliberations between the US and Iran, between India and Pakistan, trade talks between US and China, and on and on and on. The move from kinetic warfare to diplomacy would be a welcome step forward, but there are still many obstacles to overcome. Before we go to the specific cases, I'd like your thoughts on the overall dynamic underway, which you described as an historic wave toward a new paradigm following the Victory Day celebrations in Moscow and President Putin's May 11th press conference.
Well, I think that the overall dynamic is that of a new world economic order. But before I come to that, I think President Trump in the last several days has clearly tilted the situation by, trying to end the war in Ukraine. As you said, tomorrow is the meeting in Istanbul, where, from the Russian side, it is unclear who will be there. Maybe Ushakov, an advisor of Putin, maybe Lavrov, maybe some surprise in the form of Putin, which I don't think will happen, but it's not to be excluded. In any case, it was reiterated that from the Russian side, what is on the table is the Putin offer to return to the negotiations as they were in March, April 22, which obviously would be the reasonable way to go. Zelensky, is basically saying he will be there before the Russians, whatever. If it would come to such a meeting and direct discussions would take place, it would be a great fortune. Unfortunately, one can also see that the so-called coalition of the willing, the British, the French, the Germans, the Poles, they are still, playing around with putting up European troops in Ukraine as a so-called peace force, which has been rejected by Russia, and ongoing talk coming from the new German government of Merz of not disclosing from now on anymore what kinds of weapons will be delivered to Ukraine. I mean, what do you need to deliver weapons like even implied the Taurus when there is a clear perspective for peace? Now, Merz has basically said that the time where it will be said very clearly what kinds of weapons will be sent to Ukraine is over. From now on, this will be done in secrecy. And Kiesewetter, basically the defense spokesman for Merz de facto, implied, that if Russia is not making compromises, the Taurus will be delivered, which is a clear break of, the absolute last red line, which would make Germany a war party. Now, Mirsch from the SPD basically said the SPD will stick to their policy, no Taurus, because it would make Germany a war party. But, I think this noise coming from the new government is very dangerous. And I think, given the fact that the delivery of the Taurus would make Germany a war party, given the fact that only German soldiers can operate that cruise missile, I think this is a degree of irresponsibility to even contemplate that, which, I have had some discussions with some colleagues and friends and contacts in the last several days, and we were all agreeing that what is the most remarkable is the complete detachment of the present establishments from considering what will be the consequences of their action. And it is as if they are being pulled by some internal or external mechanism which has nothing to do with reality, which is some kind of a drive to keep doing what they have been doing, to maintain a position of hegemony, of dominance. And I think it's very, very important that the population gets more active and wakes up, because I think the biggest problem in Germany is still that the passivity, when you think what is at stake, that if Germany ends up, in a conflict with Russia, the likelihood that nothing at all would be left of Germany is almost 100%. And then you have these actions of these politicians. I find this such a discrepancy, which is scary. And I'm happy to announce that next week on this same format, the very famous and extraordinary rocket and nuclear missile experts, Ted Postol, will be on the program, and he will prepare for the, especially for the German population, a clear message of what the Taurus, if it ever would be deployed, would do to Germany. So that is the immediate comment on that. And naturally, it's good that there seems to be some agreement between the US and China on trade issues. The Trump trip to the Emirates and the Arab states, it seems to be mainly dominated by business deals, by arms sales from the US to Saudi Arabia. And unfortunately, it does not seem to impact the horrendous situation in Gaza, which has reached a point beyond any description.
We have a number of questions on going in more deeply to these particular cases. First of all, on Ukraine and Russia, several people wrote to say they have no trust that Zelensky is serious about peace, especially as the European leaders, Starmer, Macron, Merz, and Tusk, dubbed by one viewer as the Three Stooges plus one, seem committed to permanent war. Do you believe that the insistence from Europe for a ceasefire first, rather than negotiating for an end to the war, is designed to provoke Putin to refuse to negotiate so they can place the blame on him?
Yeah, that was an obvious attempt by these four countries or their leaders, to basically, create a trap for Putin. But Putin, I think, very swiftly judoed this. After all, he has a black belt for judoism, so he has proven one more time that he can put these European leaders on the floor rapidly. So I think that was successfully judoed.
And it seemed that Trump was backing him up by saying that Zelensky should be there to negotiate.
Yes, I think so. I think it's very clear that, with all ifs and whatnot, you can say that there is an agreement between Washington and Moscow to end that war, and the difference between those Europeans is becoming utterly clear to the whole world.
Now, you brought up the question of the horrendous situation in Gaza, with the Israelis committed to a policy of starving people, openly suggesting that that's what they intend to do. But at the same time, you have previously unthinkable developments, such as the US going around Netanyahu to negotiate with Hamas, with Yemen, with Iran. A journalist from Iran asked this question: do you think President Trump has a coherent plan, or is he improvising day by day?
Well, I don't think he has a long-term plan. I think he has an impulse. And I think he ended the war with Yemen because, even the New York Times had a lengthy article saying that it completely failed. And, several commentators in the recent period pointed to the fact that, it becomes more and more clear that military means to settle conflicts have utterly failed, all of them. Vietnam, complete failure. Afghanistan, shameful failure. Iraq, failure. Libya, catastrophe. And now Ukraine. Ukraine is lost. Prime Minister Orban of Hungary just at the recent meeting in Budapest said, the Ukraine war has been lost, and the Western leaders have a tremendous difficulty to admit it, because losing such a war is not an easy thing to digest. And now the war with Yemen was lost because Trump was presented with figures that the Pentagon had tremendous losses, drones, jets, high cost, but no result. So Trump decided to end that war as well. And I can only say that, the Trump position on Iran seems to be that he indeed says, as long as Iran agrees to have no nuclear weapons, this conflict can be settled too. And given the fact that there is still a fatwa in Iran that it is contrary to Islamic religion to go for nuclear weapons, I think there is a good chance that conflict can be settled peacefully as well.
Now, the same reporter asked, is Trump's present trip just about selling military hardware? But then there was also a question from Iran. Do you have anything to report on the progress around the Oasis plan?
Well, I think that Trump, if you look at how he behaves, many people have been noting that, and I'm not saying anything terribly surprising. But I think if you want to understand how Trump acts, he does most things what other people do with diplomacy or, visions or so forth. He does as a businessman. And, he sees the way how to increase the influence of the United States in Southwest Asia, basically by business deals. This became clear in the speech he made in Saudi Arabia, where he said he wants to see the region, building cities instead of throwing bombs against each other, making deals, creating stability through economic cooperation. So that is obviously, fitting with, Saudi Arabia, seems to play both sides. They want to have, on the one side, good relations to the BRICS. They're sort of in it, but not really. But at the same time, they have now a plan where they put pretty much their entire defense system on US delivered weapons. So I think that, as far as this goes, it's definitely a step in the right direction, but it does not address the horrendous situation in Gaza. And, I don't want to anticipate your questions, Harley, but it's really, this has reached a point, and in case our viewers are not fully in tune, let me just restate where we are. Yesterday, there was a UN Security Council meeting where the main UN responsible for, the situation in the most dramatic way, basically said that this is an ongoing genocide. It fulfills all the criteria of a legal definition of what genocide is. And even Joseph Borrell, some people may remember, he was the so-called High Commissioner of the EU, the person who had said that the EU is a garden, Europe is a garden, the rest is a jungle. Now he said that what is happening in Gaza fulfills with all legal criteria the condition of an ongoing genocide. Now, the UN representative at this UN Security Council meeting basically made the crucial point. He said, we have to confront the fact that future generations will ask us, what have we done to stop this, given the fact that it was absolutely known. And what is going on the scene, Netanyahu just announced that the IDF will go in for another intervention in the next days. The 60 days, there has been no food, medical supplies, or water. So the official qualification is that there is now an official condition of famine. The whole Gaza level 4 and 22% of the people level 5, which means they are dying like flies as we are speaking here, and the other ones are not far behind. Now, the Israeli forces have basically dismantled the previously existing 400 distribution points for food and medical supplies to only 4. And the service, given the fact that there was a huge campaign to eliminate UNRWA from the scene, is now given to a private firm where Blair, of all people, is somehow involved in. And that means that the starving people have to run through the rubble field to get to one of these distribution points, and then they are not allowed to ever go back. So this is part of a generally acknowledged now, even by the mainstream media, the effort to completely go for ethnic cleansing, drive out the Palestinians altogether, and basically take over the entire of the Gaza Strip. Now, there is this Australian journalist, Kathleen Johnson, and she made a point commenting on the fact that finally, after 19 months, some Western media start to report the horrendous truth what is going on by saying, well, it is now clear the wind is shifting and it cannot be hid anymore. And therefore, some people basically start, or some media start to report in a CYA mode, meaning cover your A ... by basically saying to be able afterwards to say, oh yeah, we reported about that. But, this is the most, that is being acknowledged now by even Borrell and others. This is the worst genocide since the end of the Second World War. And I can only say every government which is not acting to stop this is putting an enormous guilt on it. And unfortunately, I cannot set the German government free. Naturally, their argument is always that, we have an obligation to Israel because of the Holocaust. But, does that mean that you have an ongoing Holocaust and you condone it? And I think that the side effect of that is that the moral failure of the West will be, that will not be forgiven or forgotten by the global South, by the global majority of the people. And those people in the West who dismiss it, they have to kill their conscience. And I think what that does for the future of the morality of the West, everybody can figure out.
Well, as you often do, you did anticipate my next question. But actually, there were several questions, people who asked about this, the never again hypocrisy that people who say we have to fight against anti-Semitism to never allow genocide again, turn their backs on what's happening in Israel, in Gaza. But the one person wrote in and said the Israeli press is now beginning to say this is hypocrisy. And they point out that that's a change. Now, I have a question here from an American who spent the last year in Israel. And she writes that it seems to her that Trump is afraid to openly break with the Zionist lobby. She continues, he seems to be juggling between 4 bosses, the Zionist lobby in the US, Netanyahu, wealthy Arab leaders, and to the MAGA people, the Make America Great Again, his base, who now want to end the US involvement in foreign wars. She writes, I don't think his juggling act will lead to peace. What do you recommend he should do?
Well, I think he is all signs, and I don't have the privilege to talk to him directly, so I can only go by surrounding signs, are that he is trying to, somehow distance himself from Netanyahu, because Netanyahu's reputation in the whole world has become so absolutely horrible that he has to fear for his own popularity if he's seen in one boat with Netanyahu, which unfortunately there is still a big part of it. I think the best hope is the MAGA people, because there are now many people from Marjorie Greene to many others who basically demand that Trump sticks to his election promise to end all wars, not to start new ones, And I think the more the American people express themselves in this way, the better. I forgot to answer one aspect of the last question, the status of the Oasis plan. Well, we have now, the 14th of May. On June 2nd to 4th, there will be in New York, in the United Nations, a conference organized by Macron from France and Saudi Arabia, the government, on the two-state solution for Palestine. Now, the Schiller Institute and also the International Peace Coalition, we have called for an international mobilization of every force who wants to bring a solution to this absolute horrible tragedy, to mobilize to put the Oasis plan on the agenda of that UN conference as well, because you have the Egyptian reconstruction plan for Gaza. This was endorsed by all the Arab states, and for sure they will all endorse the two-state solution. But we somehow have to talk it up through articles, through speeches, through endorsements, to add the Oasis plan not only for the reconstruction of Gaza, but for the entire region, because the entire region is a desert. And the Oasis plan is supposed to not only bring water to Israel and Palestine, but to develop Jordan, to develop Syria, to develop Yemen, Iraq, even the entire region from India to the Mediterranean, from the Caucasus to the Gulf states, and transform this desert into agricultural land, into forests, into orchards, build infrastructure, build new cities. And there is no reason why, if you not cooperate with the extension of the Belt and Road Initiative, where all great neighbors should cooperate, including the United States and the Europeans, to transform that part of the world to again become the hub of development between Asia, Africa, and Europe, as it was with the ancient Silk Road. Now, such a vision, which would change the life of every nation in the region, would be the necessary signal of hope, where maybe the forces of peace would overwhelm the forces of war in such a motion. So if you have any agreement with us that you need, the new word for peace is development. This goes back to the encyclica by Pope Paul VI from 1967, Populorum Progressio, which was exactly that idea that the new name for peace is development, and that you help us to put the Oasis plan on the agenda in the next 3 weeks. So I think that is eminently possible. Trump, when he was in Saudi Arabia, invited the interim ruler of Syria, al-Shara, and announced that the United States will lift the sanctions against Syria, these infamous Caesar sanctions, in order to give Syria a chance to be built up economically and so forth. So there are some signs that it is absolutely possible, and I think we just have to increase the international pressure for the Oasis plan tremendously.
And people can register for the Schiller Institute conference, May 24th, 25th. You can go to the Schiller Institute website and there's a registration link for it. Now, we got a question about what you were saying about Merz and the deployment of the Taurus missiles. Neilwyn writes, if Germany delivers weapons that will threaten Russia's existence, Russia will deliver blows that European nations have never seen before. And he basically asks, aren't they aware that the United States will not defend Europe under those circumstances?
Obviously not. And obviously the game plan is, that if you, put European troops, so-called peace troops, which would clearly not be peace troops, into Ukraine, and then something happens that, then Article 5 of NATO or somehow the United States could be pulled in such a war. I don't think this will happen, but I think that if the Europeans, especially the Germans, are really go in this direction of putting the Taurus into Ukraine, I think Russia will react. I think, having studied the mindset and the determination, I would absolutely assume that they will either, if they, for example, would knock out the Kerch bridge, but there are many bridges in Germany who could be knocked out easily, or the factory where the Taurus is being produced could be knocked out. I'm sure that the Russians would absolutely send a signal which could not be misunderstood. I think this is extremely dangerous, because once you enter such a situation, these things can get out of control more quickly than you can twist your fingers.
Now, Helga, you recently were in China again, participating in a conference. We have a question from a US-based financial analyst who also just got back from China. He said, "We keep hearing in the Western media that the Chinese economy is weak, giving Trump an upper hand in the negotiations." He said, "I was just there. I didn't see a weak economy. I saw a robust, vital economic development process continuing." But he said also the US economy is weak with a huge debt overhang. What would be the win-win strategy for the United States in the trade negotiations with China?
Well, I think the best thing would be if the two countries would basically agree on projects developing third parties. Because, obviously there is a trade imbalance to the disadvantage of the United States. But, to try to curb that by tariffs, will only make the US consumers pay, and it will, in the final instance, weaken both sides. So why not say, okay, we have a trade imbalance that is legitimate, that the United States wants to compensate for that. Why don't we agree on certain basic projects in Latin America, in Asia, in Africa, where, there are many countries which are the origin of refugees, because either they have war or they have, like Mexico, terrible situation with the drug lobby and so forth, and many other countries where people are just economically not able to survive, and they are going and trying to get to the United States, risking their life and so forth. If, however, the United States and China would agree to cooperate in the massive build-up of infrastructure, the Chinese had just a very successful meeting of the CELAC countries. This is the Caribbean and Latin American countries. They had a summit with China in Beijing, and President Lula was there. And between China and Brazil, there was a basic understanding to increase the cooperation in many ways. Now, why is the United States not just saying, okay, they're building the Bi-Oceanic Railway, they're building a new railway between Colombia and Chancay in Peru, and why is the United States not just starting to build some other aspects of this transport grid, which was already anticipated or proposed by Alexander Humboldt, in the 19th century, and which had been updated in the 20th century by my late husband, Lyndon LaRouche, with Operation Juarez, which was a all Latin American integration program. Many of these projects are well defined and could be started tomorrow, and they would represent a game changer by, creating an incentive by producing many new productive jobs in building infrastructure, building industrial parks, building agriculture, for the young people and the unemployed to stay back home and build their own country. Now, that would resolve the problem. It would resolve the problem of the migrants, because the migrants would want to stay in their home country. Who doesn't want to stay in their home country, rather than going into a refugee camp in a hostile environment? So if you give people a chance to stay home, they will stay. and it would, it would just change the dynamic altogether. Now, I'm not unhopeful. I'm not totally hopeful, but I'm not without hope that, eventually President Trump will see the benefit of such a change in policy. It would, however, mean, to overrule a lot of the neocons in his administration who have their, dead set prejudices against Cuba, against Venezuela, and all the known, things we know about. But I think, the whole world is in such a change. The dynamic is towards a system of cooperation. And I can only confirm your estimate about the Chinese economy. It's booming. It's so many new constructions. Every time you go to China, you are flabbergasted to see how quickly they can build, entirely new industrial areas, digitalize their economy, their agriculture, build state-of-the-art projects in practically all fields. I have said it before, but the Australian Strategic Institute, they have a technology tracker, and they, in their recent update, said of 64 advanced technology areas, China is leading in 57. Now, that should be matched, and I think the Chinese economy is doing very well as compared to the Western economies. So I think if the United States would agree to go in the direction I described and shift from speculation to production, it would solve the problem in the best way.
Helga, the International Peace Coalition that you founded has continued to be, you might say, the go-to place for people who are serious about discussing these kinds of ideas that you've been presenting today. You've now had, I think, 101 or 102 weeks in a row for a Zoom call. You have another Zoom call coming up on Friday morning at 11 a.m. Eastern Time. What can people expect if they go on to the call this week?
Well, I think it will for sure discuss the situation in Gaza and try to mobilize the conscience of people, also geared towards the Oasis plan mobilization I mentioned in respect to the June conference in the United Nations. I mean, I really think that all forces of goodwill must help to put the Oasis plan on the agenda in this UN conference. That will be a big topic with speakers from the region, I'm sure, from both the Palestinian and the Israeli side. And I'm pretty sure that we will have an assessment. Naturally, this will be one day after the big day in Istanbul. We will see where we stand on the Ukraine crisis. And I think there will be also a reassessment of, how the world looks like, because these 80-year celebration of the end of World War II and the victory over the Nazis has shown that Russia is not isolated at all. There were 29 heads of state present and, a lot of bilateral meetings and so forth. So there will be taken a fresh look. Where do we stand after, or still in the middle of Trump's Middle East tour? The new developments around China and CELAC, and the strategic situation after Istanbul. So please make sure that you are tuned in and participate.
And that's this Friday again, 11 a.m. Eastern Time. And then don't forget to register for the May 24th, 25th Schiller Institute Conference. Helga, thanks for joining us, and we'll see you soon.
Well, I hope on Friday.